Sometimes when billing insurance, you may need different information displayed on the claim form than what typically goes on there. For example, maybe with a certain payer, your box 32 and 33 need to be different than what is defaulted in the system. Or maybe with Blue Cross Blue Shield, a certain provider is only credentialed with a type 2 MPI versus their individual MPI. To facilitate these alterations, you would need to set up insurance overrides in CareHD. To do that, you're going to navigate to your live location, Insurance tab, Settings, Overrides. You will only have access to the Insurance tab if you have insurance permissions on your user. I'm going to click Add Override so that we can look at the fields. When you set up CareHD, you have information that automatically pulls onto claim forms, like the rendering provider's individual MPI, your box 32 and 33 information, and those are just a few examples. An override is tied to a third-party payer and a rendering provider. It's kind of like an if-then statement. So if this individual is the rendering provider for a patient who has this certain payer, then I want the following information to go on the claim form. We're first going to name our override. Let's call this one Blue Cross Blue Shield as an example. Then I can fill out a start and end date. This signifies that any data service in between these dates will pull the below information. This is helpful in a situation if you have like historical billing information where you have provider A that was a rendering provider in your office for a certain period of time, and then as of maybe May 1st, provider A left the office and you need provider B to go on the claims for a certain time period with the following information set up in the override. The start and end date will help, again, any dates of service that fall between that date period, it will pull the information in the override. The start and end date are optional. If they are not filled out, then it will pull the override for any date moving forward when that override is set. Then I want to select my third-party payer. Here I can set, do I want the payer to be paper billed, uses referring provider, uses provider taxonomy code, uses MPI type 2 taxonomy codes. These are also fields on the payer itself. So on the third-party payer itself, these are options as well, but this is an additional override. Because again, maybe if we go back to the if-then statement, if Dr. A is a rendering provider for a patient who has this Blue Cross Blue Shield, I want these to come into play. Versus if Dr. B is a rendering provider for Blue Cross Blue Shield, I want the settings that are default in the system for that payer. Then I'm going to select the rendering provider. Here I can fill out the provider's name, the provider's individual MPI, the tax ID, and I can select if that's going to be EIN or Social Security, provider signature, and provider suffix. So again, you have this information set up under your providers tab in the location. Under the providers tab, you have the provider's name, MPI, and tax ID. So that information will automatically pull anytime that person is a rendering provider. But anything I fill out on this override screen will go on the claim versus the information that I already have defaulted in CareHD. So again, an override is saying anything I have written on this page is what I want to show on the claim versus what is set up in CareHD as my standard billing practice. Let's say, for example, this rendering provider, Sophia, is credentialed differently with this specific Blue Cross Blue Shield payer. Maybe the MPI is credentialed differently. Maybe that she's not credentialed with her individual MPI, and she's only credentialed with the type 2 MPI. Well, then I would put the type 2 MPI in this box. Maybe when she credentialed with Blue Cross Blue Shield, there was a hyphen in her last name, but it's not that way with any other payer. So I would need to set out in the provider name and signature how her name appears for that payer. If I scroll down, the other options for an override is my box 32 and 33 information. Say with this Blue Cross payer again, I'm credentialed differently when it comes to the box 32 and 33 information. I can fill out in these fields what I want box 32 and 33 to say for this payer when Sophia is a rendering provider. Again, there are some situations where you may be credentialed or set up with that Blue Cross payer, as an example, differently for your box 32 and 33 than what you typically bill out to everyone else. And that's how you have CareHD set up, is your typical billing information. But this Blue Cross payer, when Sophia is a rendering provider, has exceptions. So how do I set up those exceptions? That's with the override. It is important to note that whatever fields you fill out will go on the claim. Whatever fields you leave blank will pull the default options in CareHD. So what I fill out saying I want to override my default billing settings. So it may be advised just to fill out every field, just in case. But again, only what I fill out will change the claim. Everything else that's left blank will pull my normal billing information that I have set up in CareHD. What if I need to set up an override that goes across all my payers? Maybe as an example, when Dr. Ryan is the rendering provider, we can only bill out under a certain NPI. What do I do? How do I set up like an all-payer override? Well, what you can do is, of course, name your override, set and start end date if need be, select Ryan as the rendering provider, and then leave third-party payer blank. And then fill out on this page any information that you want to go on the claim that is different. So that is a way I can set up an all-payer override when Ryan is the rendering provider. Once I've set up an override, when does that come into play in the billing process? Our normal billing process in CareHD starts with this create claim queue. Here I can see what patients I need to bill out. At this point in the billing process, when the patients are just in the billing queue, they're pulling standard information, your default billing settings. An override has not been applied yet. An override will apply when I click create claim. Because what that does is it goes through the final validation process and looks for any overrides that would fit this claim. If there is an override that would apply to any of the patients in this batch bill, then at that point the override will apply when I click create claim. At this point, my electronic or my paper claim have been created, and I can view them or send them, and I can view the claim to make sure that my override applied. I can preview on the HCFA form to see did my override settings apply, but that override will pull on the electronic claim and the paper claim. So at this point, I can continue processing the claim and send it to the clearinghouse or print it. So what happens if I've taken claims through the billing process and I realize what is populating on the claim isn't what I need, or I get rejections from a third-party payer? And those rejections include things that would need to be set up on an override. What do? You need to go in and set up the override, again by going to Insurance, Settings, Override, set up the override. But at that point, we cannot retroactively change a claim. You would need to rebill those services so that it goes back into the billing queue, like what we just went through. It'll go back into the create claims queue, and then when you hit create claim, it will add the override at that time. So again, we cannot retroactively apply an override once you've billed it out. You would need to set that entire bill or the specific services that were denied. You would need to set them to rebill and then take them through the billing process again, at which point the override will be applied. So by following these steps, you can effectively manage your billing and your overrides to ensure compliance with specific payers and their requirements.